There you go. Here we go. I'm back. Awesome. All right. So we're going to start our live stream back up, and we are going to go ahead and begin the 3 o'clock. There's still some folks who are going to be coming in. I know there's a bunch of conversations happening right outside and up on the second floor, so they will be coming in a moment. So we have a little change to the schedule. Our 3 p.m. keynote is running a little behind Dexter, so as soon as he gets here, he'll come up and still hopefully be able to do his presentation. But the amazing Heather Bryant volunteered. So we moved her workshop to the 3 o'clock space. So Heather's going to come up and walk through the presentation that she put together and her workbook. So I'm very thankful for that. Then after that, we will hopefully have Dexter present for us. And then we will move into lightning talks, which we have our last 5 lightning talks of the day at the end of the day today. After that, we'll have drinks and appetizers at the back. Jazz Trio will be back again like they were last night. And drinks and appetizers will be at the back from about 4:30 until 6:30. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andre Nada, who is going to introduce Miss Heather Bryant.
Good afternoon, everybody. How's it going? I mean, we're a bunch of journalists excited to be here, and we're live. So how are we doing this afternoon? I'm also stoked because I don't have the big portrait up on the screen right now. But it is my pleasure. I should introduce myself. My name is Andre Nata. I am one of the 2018 John S. Knight Journalism Fellows at Stanford University. And I get the privilege of introducing an alum of the program right now, and Heather Bryant. Heather is the founder of Project Facet, an open source software platform that helps newsrooms manage the collaborative editorial process. As a journalist and software developer, she is completely fascinated with the intersection between journalism, technology, and class. Her journalism career started in Alaska, where she worked as the new media producer and digital services editor at KTOO Public Media in Juneau. She took a brief break to level up as a programmer, teaching software engineering in San Francisco while starting Project Facet. And last year, Heather was a John S. Knight Journalism Fellow at Stanford, where she researched newsroom collaboration. And I got to interview her before I got my fellowship, and it was a very eye-opening and informative experience, and I'm sure she will enlighten all of you right now. So without further ado, Heather Bryant.
I feel like that was about 80% more hype than I needed, but awesome. That's high expectations here. So one thing before we get started, I want to say keep in mind this was originally a workshop, and then we turned it into a talk, so we're all just going to roll with the changes that have been made with that. I'm really excited about this topic because, like Andre said, I started working in collaboration in Alaska where it's not really an option. It's not like a thing you do sometime with some projects. It's sort of the reality of doing journalism in a state that's 663,000 square miles, and you have like 1- and 2-person newsrooms covering that state all over. So I got a crash course in what it means to be collaborative because you have tiny newsrooms doing important work and needing to accomplish that work regardless of their circumstances. So the way this has been structured is we're all reporters and we know how to report on things. So what I've put together is a series of guiding questions to help you kind of figure out what the structure of your collaborative projects are. There's a little bit of overlap between this and the Solutions Journalism's amazing framework that some of you might have just caught. But this is also a little bit broader because collaboration doesn't always take the shape of we're doing an editorial project together. Sometimes it's we're sharing people. Sometimes it's we're sharing engineering resources. Collaborations look like lots of different things. And so the goal with this was sort of thinking about what does this look like to actually put one together? What are the questions that I need to be asking? As I've talked to newsrooms, that's like the big thing is always like, I don't even know what I don't know. I don't know what questions I need to be asking my partners. So the goal here is to address, like, here's the 10 questions you ask before you get started. Here's the 10 questions you ask at this point in the process. And I've turned this into a workbook, and there's a bunch of them up here. There's like 30 of them because I was expecting a smaller group, but feel free to grab one if you want one, and we'll get started. So this is something that we all know, but I feel like it's always worth repeating. It's like why we do partnerships with each other, why we collaborate with each other. And I feel like it's worthwhile to repeat this on a regular basis, because when we think about the ways to apply collaboration for our newsrooms, and we think about all of the different benefits that we can get out of collaboration, it sort of opens our eyes to the opportunities in collaborating and the different ways that we might do that. I mean, it's not always we're going to do a series of stories together. Sometimes it's having an extra set of eyes on a data project that you don't have another person, in your newsroom to check your methodology. Sometimes it's that you need a reality check about the context of a story, or sometimes it's just, I don't have access to this place, or you don't have access to this place, and we can do this together. I want to stop for just a little brief story here that sort of opened my eyes and reminded me about this. I was really fortunate a couple weeks ago to go back to Alaska to their press club meeting, and I sat in on a news directors meeting for a bunch of the public radio stations, and they had this round table that was just this wonderful round table that I think kind of just shows what you can do, and it was everybody saying, okay, this is what I have to offer to you. I have trade with this airline. We can put you up in this hotel because we have an agreement. This office has an extra room in it if you need to throw down a sleeping bag if you're in town to do a story. This reporter is a pilot and we have an airplane, so if you need to get across the bay to do a story here, this reporter has a boat if you need to get across the bay, if you need to get somewhere. And it was everybody just talking about, here's what I have to contribute. Here's the way that I can help you in doing whatever you're doing, even if we're not doing that thing together, but pooling the resources in a way that empowers everybody to be able to do their work. And that was a really magical moment to just see that, right? To see everybody being like, this is what I can offer you. This is how I can help you. I just was blown away by that, because I feel like that's the only place I've ever seen that level of just, let's do this. Let's figure this out. Whatever it is we need to do to figure out how you can do your storytelling, we're going to figure that out together. So in considering collaboration, we're at a collaboration conference. We're like, yes, collaboration. Everything is collaboration all the time. It's not always all the time. And it's really worth thinking about, is this the right project for me? Is this the right partner for me? Is this the right thing to actually collaborate on? So I tend to think about collaborations as being built with magnets, not blocks. Blocks are evil. You step on them in the middle of the night and it hurts. Magnets, though, if you think about how they work, there has to be an attraction for them to fit together, right? You have to connect the right ends for this to actually work, right? You have to connect the right people for a collaboration to work. And the bond in magnets is strong, but it's not permanent. It can change. The arrangement can change. It can take different shapes. It can evolve. And the components, the magnets themselves, they don't have to be the same kind, right? And you don't have to have the same kind of newsroom. You don't have to have the same size of newsroom for this to work. So I like to think about this as my metaphor. And you can build with many magnets something you can't with only one. And that's the power of why we collaborate with each other, right? It's a capacity building resource. So I left us a blank line so we can build this out. But the goal behind these questions are, let's think about all of the things we need to consider when we're starting to think, is this time for collaboration? And then, keeping in mind this was originally a workshop, I would love to hear any questions that you think should be part of the slide, because the goal is to create this resource for newsrooms that works for everybody. So do you have a project that you want to collaborate on? If collaboration is something that is newer for your organization, this is a far easier starting point than finding someone and then figuring out what you want to collaborate on. Usually I have a partner, let's figure out what we can do together, is something that you do after you've collaborated with someone for a while. Now, that's not saying it can't be done, but this is usually a little bit of an easier approach to say, okay, we know we want to cover, some big topic in our area. We want to cover elections together. We want to cover healthcare. We want to cover poverty, whatever that is. And then finding the partners that are best situated to work with you on that project is traditionally an easier path. And then does collaboration even make sense for that thing that you're trying to cover? Not every project will be collaborative, but pretty much every project can be collaborative. It depends on the approach that you want to take, and it depends on the thing that you are trying to cover. And it's worth thinking about, how is collaboration specifically, like the collaborative part of this project, how is that going to accomplish your goals? If you go into this thinking, well, we're working with 3 other newsrooms, this project is going to be successful because we're being collaborative, and that's automatically our recipe for success. That hasn't answered that question yet, right? So how does the act of working with these other newsrooms actually help you achieve your goals is something that you really should be reflecting on before you get too far down the path. And then I think this next question is sometimes hard for newsrooms to consider about whether or not we have the capacity to be good partners ourselves. A lot of newsrooms jump straight to, well, do I want to work with them? Are they going to be a good partner for me? Do they publish at the level that I think they should be publishing at? Are they going to be able to do the kind of work that I want them to be able to do? It's really worth reflecting on, do you even have the capacity to be a good partner? Are you committed to doing all of the work that's going to be required for doing that? And are you going to recognize that you will also have to change and adapt to being a partner as well? That's not just an expectation for all of the other people who are going to be a part of your group. And then the buy-in from your own team and your own organization is really important. Top-down mandates of, well, guess what, guys? We are all collaborative now. Congratulations. This is going to be super fun, I promise. That doesn't work. You need to have your people on board with what you're doing. You need to have management on board with what you're doing. The buy-in from your team can make or break a lot of things because you don't want your team being the people who disappear from communication, who suddenly stop showing up in Slack or are always busy when you have that meeting about this project. Having an invested team fully committed to doing this is a really big part of this. What else do you think should be on this slide? Like, what other question have you asked yourself when you've been thinking about collaborating? And feel free to just scream them at me. I'm cool with that. Any thoughts? What the specific goals are. Definitely a big one. Sorry? Yes, that's a good one. Yes. Yes. And that's also in my next session. He was like, so what are you actually using? Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yes.
She's in there right now doing the
Okay. So let's say we're at this stage, we're like, all right, collaboration's a thing that we're going to embark on this road. And now we have to ask ourselves, so what does this actually look like for our organization? So keeping in theme with our questions and being reporters and reporting out what this process of collaboration can look like for us. What are the goals and the scope of the collaboration? What is it that we are actually going to try to accomplish? And do we have a good sense of what all does that encompass? And kind of having the idea of what the boundaries of what you're willing to do is really important as you negotiate the extent of the partnership with all of the other partners, right? This second question is a reflection of the response that I got from almost every collaboration I've talked to when I've been researching collaboration, which is, if my partner doesn't have values that I can understand, then I'm not sure, I struggle to make decisions with them. Having some alignment in values, or at least understanding what your partner's values are, doesn't feel like, right off the bat, you're like, oh, that's not like a huge concern. But when you get to the point where big decisions have to be made, or maybe even a conflict in a decision being made, understanding where your partner is coming from with why they're saying what they're saying is a huge advantage to everybody involved, because then you can understand, why is it that they're in this in the first place? What is it that they're trying to achieve that might not necessarily be my goal, but I need to understand what their goal is. The strengths and capacity and the needs is a really good thing to do. And so one of the things that I recommend in this is literally list out every partner that you think you're going to be working with. What is it that you liked about them? What is it that you thought that they were going to bring to the collaboration? What is your understanding of their staffing and their capacity? One of the things that, I see organizations struggle with occasionally is that you will never find a partner who is as evenly matched with you in terms of resource capacity and their ability to do things. There's always going to be a slight imbalance in what everybody contributes. And one of the things that can be really damaging to a partnership is some sense of scorekeeping, right? Well, they didn't contribute as much of this as we did. They didn't do enough photography in this area. They didn't do this thing that we did. You have to figure out what's the actual realistic capacity, what your expectations are, and what you can be comfortable with giving that you might not necessarily get back in a very even format. One of the folks that I talked to about collaboration, Molly Kabler with Coast Alaska, she talks about this idea of there's this generosity of spirit that makes their collaboration work, and also the idea that what you give out will come back around to you in the partnership, and you have to trust that your partners are going to be putting in as much work as you. It just may not manifest itself in the same form as what the work you're doing is, and you have to be okay with that, and you have to know what your minimum expectations are, and you have to figure out, what you're comfortable with, and what's your end point of like, that's not okay anymore, that's not fair or equitable. So it's really worth considering that for yourself and for your partners. And then how will your partners contribute to the collaboration? Is this different platform products? Is this that their expertise is in events? Is their expertise engagement? Is their expertise the actual reporting and investigative work? Is it data? Figuring out what your partner is actually going to do for your collaboration, what it is they've brought to the table, and just have that be something that everybody's on board with, right? Like line that out and know what's expected of everybody, and figure out, what's reasonable here? What does this make sense? What is your strength? What are you going to do for this project? And what are we going to do for you in this project? I'm a big fan of timelines, so this next question might be depending to your taste. And that's one of the things that I like about approaching this from a questions direction is you don't have to answer the questions that don't make sense for your project, but they're at least a starting point for you. Having a sense of a timeline that everybody shares and a timeline for each of the individual partners will help alleviate friction before it occurs. If a partner is committed to, when they're going to submit whatever it is that they're contributing, when they're going to start whatever part of it they're going to start, just having that as, everybody knows that this is the date, everybody knows that this is what's expected. It makes it a lot easier if you either have to follow up with a partner who hasn't actually honored their part of the agreement yet, or, if you want to check in a little early and be like, so it's coming up on that deadline. Do you need help from me? Do you need support? What does that look like? It's a lot easier if those dates were established in advance. And the goal for a lot of these questions is exactly that. Figure out what you can figure out before you start to reduce the friction during, right? When these questions pop up in the middle of working on a really big project, they get a lot harder to answer than when you're thinking with a clear head and not all of your deadlines and not all of your frustrations that might have come up through working with people and all of the different, challenges that can come with that. And then what's the leadership structure? Do you have one team lead? Do you have an independent project editor? Do you have a team of people made up of the constituent newsrooms? Some projects are able to find the funding to hire someone. Some projects are in newsrooms so small that that is simply not the way that they can spend their funding, and so they make up teams made up of the constituent newsrooms, or they have one person who is sort of the anchor, but really reflect on who's the person who is going to drive this, because you do need someone or multiple someones to actually facilitate this type of work and be the person who's following up on all the answers to these questions. And then the level of formality is a question that a lot of people ask. Do we need MOUs? Do we need formal contracts? Do we need to spell everything out? Some collaborations were literally two people at a bar with a beer and they wrote a few things down on a napkin, and that was good enough for them because it was literally two people doing this collaboration from each newsrooms. Some organizations need things to go through a very formal process. So you have to figure out what works for you, what you need organizationally speaking, what your processes are. Do those need to be written out on paper? Some organizations find it very helpful to just have it written out, what's our process for managing a disagreement? What's our process for if someone goes rogue and we have to consider kicking them out? Like, do we have a threshold for this that everybody is agreeing to? So figure out, what's your comfort level with informality and, what are your needs organizationally in terms of making this a strict project that you need to have lots of rules spelled out for. What else would you add to this? This is before you've started collaborating, and you want to know the answer to something before you've even started. What would you want to hear? That's a good one. Yes. I really like that. I think that's a really great idea to have everybody so how could this go wrong? And let's address that right now. I really like that idea. Like the selection, how do we invite people who gets in? I like that. Do you mean exit plan if someone wants to be pull the ripcord and be like, this isn't right for us? I like that. Any others? Ooh, that's a good one. I like that. Do you mean in terms, can you elaborate on that? I'm kind of curious where you're coming from with that. think that's a really good point. One of the things that I've heard from newsrooms is like, how do we keep our core of this is who we are, and this is how we do things, and this is a general way we operate, and then how much do we have to be flexible in order to be a part of this thing? Like, how do we maintain our identity as who we are and what we do and how we do it, but also, figure out a way to fit into this thing that is larger than us? How much change are we comfortable with? That's really good. Very good. Any others? Those are really good ones. I really like those. See, we're already making this better by the minute. This is excellent. We're collaborating on collaboration. Let's get a little meta in here. So you've considered it. This is right for us. We're going to collaborate. We've talked about how we think we're going to do this and some of the structure that we're going to go with. But then when you get into the day-to-day of we're actually running this, whatever it is that we're doing, we're collaborating now. We're going to do this collectively. What does it look like from the day-to-day to actually run this? Your communication plan is the thing that will make or break you every single time. How much redundancy can you plan for? What platforms you're going to use to talk to people? This is the linchpin of every single collaboration, because collaborations are made up of people and people have to talk to each other. Like, that is the only way we can work together. That is the only way we can do anything together, is by communicating. And so this, I'd say in the top level of questions you answer, this is the one to spend time on, because everybody communicates differently. And you have to figure out, how do you change, especially if you're the coordinator of this project, if you're the person who is herding the cats. Your responsibility is effective communication, not communicating just the way that you want to, right? And that's a hard thing sometimes to think about. We think, okay, I'll say we're all going to use Slack or we're all going to use email, and that's going to be fine, and everybody's going to do that. They're not going to do that. You have to figure out what your strategy is to communicate with everybody that you need to communicate with on their level, because the goal isn't to change them. The goal is to successfully collaborate with them. So you have to figure out, what does that look like for you? How does this work on the day-to-day? What is your workflow? Who do reporters answer to? Who do editors answer to? What is the actual structure of moving either content through this collaboration or whatever kind of information you're dealing with? Having this sort of spelled out so that people know who they have to go to for answers is really helpful, because if they're at a point, well, I did the thing, I went and I reported my story, now what do I do with it? I have all of this information, I want to publish it. But if they don't know who they're going to, if they don't know the process they're expected to go through, then you kind of throw a wrench into things and people end up experiencing friction and unhappiness with this. So working it out, map out, what's the expectation? Who talks to who, and when do they have to talk to that person, and how are they going to do that? What tools are we going to use? What's the expectation for how they're using? Is everybody on those things? Do they have access? Do they know how to use them? Like, invest time in really thinking about what is the workflow through this whole process. To your point about logos, what are the shared resources that need to be established? Everybody's logo, the link to everybody's website, the link to everybody's social media, what tagline goes at the bottom of every single story and at the end of every script. Put all of that together. Put it in a place where it is unmistakable in its access. Everybody has it. No one is missing anything, and there's never any question of where do you go. Write out the language. Nobody has to make that up on the fly. It's there. It's ready to go, and then you have no excuse for not having it there. And this is very important to ensure that equitable attribution of the work that's being done, and also consistency and branding for your audiences as well, if everybody is consistent in what they're doing. So this is, I think, is a really important one. Well, we work in journalism, and that means we often change jobs, and so turnover is something that I think is really important to think about as well, especially when you're partner organizations. If the person who is the driving force for actually participating moves on to a new job, what does that mean for your collaboration? It's worth thinking about. It's worth put a little bit of time into, okay, if this person is the reason this organization is engaged in collaboration with us, do I need some sort of backup plan? Is there someone else there that I need to be talking to so that we can ensure this keeps going in case, our point of contact moves on? And sometimes when your point of contact moves to another organization, you just gain a new organization, and that's always fun, but you can't count on that happening. So it's worth thinking about what happens when, the person who drives things leave. if you are the organization who's really pushing things along, what happens when your person leaves? You know, do you have sort of a deputy of sorts who can sort of take over and who knows where everything is and who knows everybody's involved and has the capacity to start, you know, fulfilling that role? And that's why documentation is so important. I'm really big on having basically a tech stack log that everybody knows. We use Slack for this, we use email for that, we use FTP for this, whatever that might be. Something that everybody has access to and everybody knows about. Having, you know, your onboarding questions and all of these types of things together and ready to go means that if you lose someone, you're not stuck and you're not trying to teach someone really, really fast by having them go through a desk and find all the Post-it notes that have these things scribbled down on them. And also when you onboard new partners or you're training people who want to be a part of this, you have the resources ready to go. And then the next time you collaborate, you're also already set for a lot of things because you can just change out the pieces that are different. Are you familiar with change logs? Like apps have change logs. Like every time an app updates, it says, this is what this has happened to this. We're using this version of the thing. We fixed these bugs. I like doing change logs for newsroom tech stacks and also for collaboration tech stacks. Like this is what we use. If we change it, we document it. Like those types of things are pretty straightforward to write. It's literally, this is what we use. This is how we use it. If you have a question about it, this is who you talk to. It's pretty short to put together, but I think it's pretty handy for newsrooms as well. This next question is sort of a new addition to this, but really it's worth thinking about in nature of how news breaks now. How will regular news and breaking news impact people participating in your project? Is your project so time sensitive and special that your partners and everybody who's in it, they're in it regardless of what happens externally to this project? Is everybody going to be working on this no matter what happens in the world? Is it, you know, that sensitive or that important? Or is it the kind of project that may be interrupted by, you know, like a major weather event or something like that? And if that happens, what does that look like? Do you pause for a while? Does someone else come in and take over that work? Do you have to replace that particular piece that's being done by that partner? It's worth thinking a little bit about that. Some collaborations will say, okay, well, we'll pitch in and help you on this type of coverage since you've got people who've been sent somewhere else and we have enough staffing that, you know, we can help you with some of that as well. So it's worth put some time into that and think about, you know, is this flexible enough? Can we afford to say, okay, come back in 3 weeks when things have mellowed out a little bit for you? Or, you know, this is time sensitive. This is super important. Nobody walks away from this for, you know, X amount of time. And then it's hard to have this last conversation, but it's important to have this last conversation because sometimes it's an accident and sometimes it's a jerk. And you don't know which one it's going to be until it happens, right? This is part of why it's really good to have that conversation of if someone doesn't fulfill, you know, the things that they've committed to doing, you know, who has that conversation with them? What does it look like to say, okay, maybe this isn't the right time for you to participate, or, you know, maybe you haven't fulfilled the things that you've committed to doing, and maybe this collaboration is not the right collaboration for you. Any project that involves people always has the potential to involve people who aren't going to, you know, uphold their part of things. And it's, you know, a little bit of time in figuring out, okay, what does it look like when we do this? That way it's not just like a huge thing when it actually has to happen. You know, it's more of a, hey, look, we all spelled out these requirements together. You know, you hit this threshold of this isn't working out, so now we're having this conversation that we all knew was going to come. So it helps you a little bit also with having those conversations when you have something to point to that everybody's agreed on. What else would you put on here? Any other questions that come to mind for day-to-day? This is how things need to work. This is what people need to be doing. This is what people need to know. Nice. Anything else? Excellent. We've got management locked down. That's great. I wish it was this easy in real life. And then the last part of this is really taking a look at what worked for us. We're awesome at reporting on how other organizations, industries, everybody did the thing that they did, and we kind of suck at doing it for ourselves. So making that a more formal process is helpful, especially if you feel like you're going to be doing this multiple times. So did collaboration really contribute to this project in the way that you thought it would? Did it create the impact that you thought it was going to create for you? Did you meet those goals that you were, setting out to meet? Would you work with those partners again? Not every relationship works out. Is that someone that you would go back to and say, hey, that was awesome, let's do another project together, I have a great idea, or you have a great idea? And is there some version of that that you can share with them as constructive feedback that helps all of us, right? If you can give them some sense of, it was really great to work with you, but communication wasn't very prompt, and we would have liked to hear from you more often. Is that something that you feel like you can address if we were to work together again? Would your partners be willing to work with you again? Is another important question that I think you have to ask. Did you honor your commitments? Did you meet the deadlines that you agreed to? Were you the rogue partner who messed up something and published early or forgot to attribute people? There are a lot of projects that pick their partners by looking at the organizations that have collaborated before. If people don't want to collaborate with you, that will not be a secret for very long. It's worth thinking about the kind of reputation you have as a collaborative partner if this is something that you want to do. Do you have a mechanism for collecting feedback from your team, like the individuals who were involved in this? Whether you want to do that anonymously or whether you want to do it through some sort of discussion group, what do you think is going to get you the best information? So you can figure out what were your gaps in managing your team so that they could participate. What were their hesitations? Did they have something that they, were really excited about? Did they have something that didn't work for them very well? That sort of team feedback can help you refine